Miami quarterback Tua Tagovailoa unfortunately just suffered another really concerning looking concussion, once again displaying that abnormal posturing, fencing-like response on the field with his hands, similar to what we saw last season. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Dr. Brian Sutterer, and my goal in this channel is to help teach you more about the medical side of the sports world. And we're going to take a closer look tonight at, unfortunately, what just happened again with Tua here in the third quarter against the Bills. Now, everybody saw him take this hit. It was pretty apparent when he was on the ground. We saw his body in, once again, a similar rigid kind of posturing response after this clear concussion. He's been ruled out with a concussion. So let's talk about what happened last year. Let's talk about what we're seeing here, explain visually what's going on and just what this might mean with Tua's health going forward. This, of course, was what we saw last season when Tua had his concerning concussion. And, you know, when we see something visual like this, obviously it looks very concerning. This doesn't necessarily mean that it was a more severe concussion or a more severe head injury, but when we see these outward displays, we know for sure that there has been this clear and obvious brain trauma. Whenever somebody gets a concussion, one of the common things we can see from an external sort of sign of a concussion that you can visually observe is going to be abnormal posturing, meaning abnormal contraction or flexion of the limbs or the muscles because of this increased motor tone that's being abnormally fired from our brain as a result of that brain trauma. The fencing response is the most classic thing we'll see, where one arm sort of gets extended outward in this fencing position, which is thought to be reactivation of this primitive reflex that we have when we're little. It gets reactivated within our brain, within the brainstem. And that was similar to what we saw here with Tua. We saw this abnormal posturing with his right hand where those muscles were contracted, not because he's volitionally doing it, but because there's been enough brain trauma that it's activating those neural pathways, it's activating those circuits abnormally to cause that contraction, this seizure-like response. This was the play where it happened, and there's no real mystery about the mechanism, of course. This is a situation that no matter how much you try and train, teach an athlete, you know, we heard all this stuff about Tua learning how to fall. Whenever you lower your head, his eyes are closed, he's clearly trying to brace for impact, gets this direct axial load compressing into the top of his head, combined with this rotation where his head gets knocked off to the side, brainstem, the brain are going to get rotated and twisted, imparts clear force into the brain to cause this head injury. No mystery here with our mechanism. Now, next we'll talk about what we saw on the field this time with that motor activation and what it can mean going forward. But first, I want to give a quick shout out to the sponsor of this video. Injuries don't just happen to professional athletes, but to everyone. But like those pros we watch on TV, strength training is an important way to help reduce the risk of injury and keep our bodies healthy. And that's where the sponsor of today's video, TrainWell, is here to help. TrainWell makes strength training accessible to everyone. To start off, you get matched with a real personal trainer who has an onboarding video call with you to talk through all of your individual goals, your experience with exercise and strength training, and what equipment you might have accessible. I had a great video call with Mike where he went through exactly what I was looking for and helped develop a tailored, personalized exercise plan within their app that was going to be easy for me to follow and give me success. During the actual workouts, TrainWell has a fantastic app that shows you how to do the different exercises and gives you audio and visual cues to help guide you along. After each exercise, you can communicate and give feedback to your personalized trainer to learn about ways to improve or maybe adapt the exercises going forward. Right now, the first 100 people to sign up with my link down in the description are going to get 14 days for free and then $25 off their first month. It genuinely helps me meet my individual personal strength training goals. And it's great having a personalized trainer that I can communicate with and have that support to guide me along this strength training journey. So go check out TrainWell today. Again, the first 100 people to sign up, 14 days free plus $25 off their first month by clicking the link down below. Now, what's happening in the brain as this hit occurs, right? All of Tua's momentum is carrying him forward into the Bills player. As he makes contact, there's this sudden, abrupt stop where right there, his brain wants to continue moving, the brainstem wants to continue moving forward, but you've hit this rigid object. And so the helmet, the skull stops, the brain continues to move, and all of that energy gets imparted into the actual cells within the brain. You then get this rotational component, and what happens to actually cause the concussion and cause the brain injury is a whole sequence of things. There's actual rotational shear forces that can damage, that can tear the neurons. You get this widespread sort of brief activation and then release of neurotransmitters as all that energy is being transferred into the skull, thinking of like that brain, you know, bouncing back and forth within the skull. The combined component here of that rotational twist can put additional stress on the brainstem, which we theorize might be part of how and why we see those external posturing responses because a lot of those reflexes are centered within the brainstem. One of the first things we can observe then with the posturing is we see his right lower extremity. The right leg is plantar flexed, that foot is pointed downward, the ankle's pointed downward, along with a little bit of this inversion. That's not what happens when you're just completely limp and unconscious. That's going to be from muscle activation, again, centering within the brain, going down and affecting that right lower leg. And now from this angle, we can see not only do you get that initial axial load into the head, but then as he falls, his head is going to smack against the turf, which is going to cause another insult to the brain and might have been part of why we saw that posturing sort of response. So as we keep playing through here, initially we're going to see his body again, that right lower leg. We see how it's tensed up. We see that ankle pointed downward. We're going to start to see the right hand go into that awkward flexed position with his hands being rigid, similar to what we saw happen last year. And then as he's trying to kind of roll over again, we see that rigid firing of the hands. The arms are coming up towards the head in that sort of protective response. And then as he continues to try to get up here, we even see some changes in the left hand. As he's working to sort of regain conscious, push himself up, we see how that left hand is awkwardly extended backwards. Again, showing all these external signs of that brain overactivation, those reflexes being reactivated as a result of this significant brain trauma. When we saw him coming off the field, I'll admit, it looked like he still didn't really have a clear sense of where he was. I'm glad we saw him ruled out right away. There was no question. We see those visible signs. It doesn't matter what your exam shows. It doesn't matter if Tua says he's completely asymptomatic. You see that visible evidence of that tonic posturing on the field, you're automatically done. And he still seemed to me to be pretty dazed. Now, just because, again, we saw that severe outward display of the brain trauma, that doesn't mean that this is going to be a multi-week, prolonged, super long recovery. What matters more so in how slow or how quickly you're going to go with the recovery. Yes, you have the baseline 5 steps with the NFL protocol, but also you're going to consider the individual athlete's history. Tua, having undergone serious head injuries like this before, I would expect they're going to be more conservative with him. In no way would this disqualify him from being able to continue playing football. There's not a set number of concussions that we keep track of. There could be some athletes who get disqualified after 1 concussion and others who might have 5, 6, 7, or 8. It really depends more on how you respond to each of them and what your residual symptoms are. Now, Tua could look at this and say, goodness, clearly there is something about his brain that seems to be more sensitive to these impacts. And this one, I don't know if it's just having a sensitive brain, but I think anybody who takes a hit like that is going to be at risk of a head injury. So I don't think this is something where we can say, boy, clearly Tua is more at risk. This really does just feel a bit more like bad luck. We don't know of anything that would say, man, the fact that he's had now multiple outward displays of this posturing means there's something inherently wrong with his brain. I presume a long time ago they've done some brain imaging and they probably haven't found anything structural, or we probably would have heard about it, or he might have been disqualified. So just because we saw this happen another time, I don't think means that Tua is done with his football career. However, each time that this happens, you have to start asking those questions more and more. Again, nobody knows what the number is where you would say this is too much, it's not safe. You're probably going to get multiple opinions. You're going to see how long his recovery is. If his recovery and symptoms are prolonged for many weeks, a month plus, that might make them more cautious and make him say, yeah, I might think about stepping away from football. But if in a week he feels great, totally asymptomatic, runs through the protocol just fine, I don't really see a reason where he can't come back and play. But what if it happens a 3rd time? What if it happens a 4th time? Those are all the discussions that you have to involve the athlete. You have to involve multiple specialists. You have to involve all the interested parties to help make that educated decision. But there's nothing black and white about saying it happened again. Tua's career is over. Yes, with each subsequent time, you start worrying more and more about that long-term brain health. But right now, there's no way of proving visibly what we see today and how that is going to affect down the road just from what we see on TV. So concerning, absolutely. Hopefully Tua doesn't have any sort of internal brain trauma. Of course, that's always a possibility. Brain bleeds, internal sort of trauma with subdural hematomas, epidural hematomas. Could have a neck injury from something like this as well. So we'll check all that out first. Let the dust settle with his symptoms and everything before we start speculating about the future of his career. That's it for the video, everybody. Let me know as always any questions or comments down below. And until next time, we'll see you later. Thank you again to TrainWell for sponsoring the video. Again, click the link down in the description. The first 100 people to sign up are going to get 14 days free plus $25 off their first month.